Construction is in full swing and we've had some interesting guests drop by. Hey, we've got a show full of music and daffodils coming up next. During my years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore and create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to The Garden Home, a show about design and blurring the lines between inside and out. Now, in today's show, we've got a lot to talk about. One of the things, of course, will be daffodils, and we've got hundreds of thousands of them. I also want to talk to you about how the progress is coming along with our new environmentally friendly house you can see up there on the hill. Today, we're going to visit with some guests at the retreat. First, Chuck Leavell, who's not only an amazing musician who's played with everyone from the Allman Brothers to the Rolling Stones, but he's also a tree farmer and conservationist. I think you're going to enjoy hearing what Chuck has to say and hearing how he got these school kids involved in thinking green. We'll also take a look at these daffodils. You see, back in the fall, students from a local school came out and planted these and then came back to pick them for a fundraiser. We'll follow along and see the progress. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that I garden out here organically. That's very important to me. So in today's show, I thought I would give you a few tips on how I deal with pests and problems out here in an organic and safe way, from the fruit trees to my roses. So why don't we get started by heading up to the house and taking a look at some of the progress. That's looking great, guys. Well, the construction carries on. Today it's out in the landscape. You know, it's not finished until the landscape's done. We're making great stride here. You see, this is on the west lawn, and what we've done is we've planted a double row of trees and created an alley. Now, those trees are really interesting because those are actually wisteria trees. They've been trained, as you know, wisterias are great vines, but these have been trained with a single trunk and a canopy. And this particular wisteria is one called Wisteria floribunda. It's the Japanese wisteria. It has those really long flower panicles, or actually racemes they're called. You see, the Chinese wisteria is the one that we see more commonly, has a much shorter raceme, and that's Wisteria sinensis. Now, what's going to be great is once these leaf out and we get the lawn down, we're going to have the steps coming down here to this pad, and we'll have a path that wraps around here and down to the garden, and this entry will have a gate, and we'll have a gate there, so it means we're getting really close. You know, this time of year is really amazing. You can go from barren twigs and leaves in just a matter of no time, even with the temperatures as cool as they are in the very earliest spring. Now, this is an espaliered fruit tree. In particular, this one is a kefir pear, and it's clipped in the candelabra form. And it's easier, I think, to see in the barren winter. You can see that shape. Now, what's been interesting here is I've really tried to follow an organic pest control model with these fruit trees, and it's not easy. So far, what we've done is we've sprayed all the fruit trees here with dormant oil, which you can apply in the winter. And what it does, it's a horticultural oil that suffocates the larvae or the eggs of insects. And I think it's particularly effective on things like scale. And then what we've done to combat against fire blight, we do an application of copper. And we use a Bordeaux mix, which is a traditional mix for working with grapes, but it also applies in trying to manage fire blight with fruit trees. And then we use a bacterium called agromycin. Now, I try to avoid spraying anything when the bees are at work, but you can't always time things that way. The honeybees are important to us out here because they're great pollinators, and they're having their own trouble. I mean, you've probably heard of colony collapse syndrome, but that's a whole nother story. The point is, we try to use as many green methods as we can out here to help protect not only the plants, but many of these very important pollinators, such as the honeybee. And as you can see, in just a few short weeks, these things have gone from barren twigs to flowers, which the honeybees pollinated, and now you can already begin to see the little pears forming all over these trees. Looks like we're going to have a bumper crop this year. I don't know about you, but one of the most intriguing things about this time of year is the color green. Everywhere you turn, there are all these different shades of green, and I love the shades that are reflected in moss. Just take a look at some of this that I gathered in the woods. Moss is often underrated and underestimated. There are lots of uses for it. If you've got a situation where you can't grow grass, it's too shady, or maybe the soil's too acidic, you might just think about doing an entire landscape of moss. It can be very beautiful and compelling. For me, moss goes beyond color. It's the texture that can really arrest your attention. You take moss with its velveteen covering, a few rocks, and flowing water, well, you've created a magical space. Now, what I'm doing today is I'm actually going to get some moss started on some of these pots. In my shade garden, they look really good with moss growing on them. They look really old. This is a very simple recipe. You simply take some club moss that you would gather in the woods. You take 1 part moss to 1 part sugar to 3 parts beer. Ah, the secret ingredient. And hit puree. Now let this blend for about 1 minute. What you're creating here is really a moss smoothie. Just take off the lid, and now you're ready to take this mixture and just apply it to the container like this. Now, one little tip, you can actually moisten the container, soak them in water, and they'll take the substance in better than if they're dry like this. But you just want to coat the entire terracotta pot with a paintbrush. And then what I like to do is go ahead and sit this pot in place the north side of the house where it's cool and moist. That's the key here. You have to create an environment for the moss to grow. You've inoculated the pot with the spores, and the beer and the sugar serve as food for the moss, and now all you have to do is wait. Now this takes a little while, so if you expect to have moss on here for a weekend party, you better forget it, because it's not going to happen. But it's really worth the wait, because what happens is these pots take on a quality all their own. They grow a beautiful patina. They actually have a living plant growing on them, and they can add quite a bit of atmosphere to your garden. Give it a try. You know, I just can't tell you how much pleasure I've derived in sharing all of these daffodils this spring. You know, Daffodil Hill is really coming along quite beautifully. But you know, these daffodils just don't show up on their own. I've had a lot of help getting these in the ground. As a matter of fact, last fall, I had the Episcopal Middle School out here, and they were such a big help in getting so many of these daffodils planted. You see, it was in the late fall, around 1st of November, and we planted, I don't know, that day probably 4,000 or 5,000 bulbs.
I watch my dad and my mom garden, but I don't really garden. But I like doing this though, it's fun.
Hey, could we put about 3 or 4 right here? See here, could we get about 3 or 4 right here?
I heard a kid over there say, I really did not know that. I mean, you were throwing examples and facts out very quickly for them. And I think they were learning a ton. And I heard one teacher say, for sure, a couple of facts will be on some exams next week. So
well, they were all threatened with a quiz after this is over,
It's
so
true.
hopefully they were paying attention.
I think they are.
Well, there's so many lessons that you can learn from hands-on work, don't you think?
Oh my gosh. And yes, I think they're doing that right now. But our kids kind of play around in the dirt, and this is just a huge scale. And to get to see this from an early stage is just amazing.
I think the cycles are important. They'll be back in the spring to pick the daffodils and sell them to raise money.
Yes, I did hear though, one of them said, I sure like picking more than planting. So,
That's good.
yeah, I guess so.
Well, you have your planters and you have your pickers, don't you? Yeah, something for everyone, which is what's great about this, because it's a team effort. Each of the 15 teams have to, at some point, come together to make sure that all these daffodils are spaced properly.
If they want to eat lunch, that's true.
That's it.
So,
Holding lunch over their head.
That's right, we
Yeah,
are.
very good. A Captain John Smith statement. No work, no eat.
that's right. Oh, it is so beautiful out here though. Thank you so much for doing
Well,
this
thanks for
us.
being here.
This is
It's a great
wonderful.
pleasure.
It's cool though to see like each part of the process, because you start out like with planting and then you see what they look like when they're done.
They planted them with trowels. But you see, first we worked the ground up. We used a turning plow, turned the soil, and then we tilled it. That made it soft and easy for them to dig in. And then they took the trowels and buried the bulbs. See, the bulbs were planted about 10 inches apart and about 8 inches deep. And by spring, you could begin to see the daffodils emerging. And now, well, they're just about at peak, and they've absolutely been glorious. You see, we have about 76 varieties of daffodils out here on Daffodil Hill. And what's wonderful about a blend like this is that you get plenty of early, mid, and late season bloomers. So what I get is almost a month and a half of daffodil bloom here, which is the way to go. Now, the reason I chose daffodils is that they're so reliably perennial here in my Zone 8 garden. You see, what's important for me is for these things to come back year after year. And in order for that to happen, there are a few things I keep in mind. One is I make sure they're planted in full sun, and I don't cut the foliage back. I just let it die back naturally. And by doing that, I ensure that these bulbs will return year after year. So you may ask, Alan, why don't you plant tulips out here with the same amount of passion? Well, you see, tulips in this zone aren't reliably perennial. They're not going to come back year after year because it gets so warm so early in the season, the foliage burns back and it doesn't have enough time to reinvigorate that bulb so we can be guaranteed a bloom for next year. I've said multiple times the garden, well, it really offers us many opportunities to learn, and that's particularly true of children. That's why I love to have them out here at the Garden Home Retreat. Not only do we learn about how to grow beautiful flowers, in this case daffodils, the life cycle of plants, but also how to harvest them and how to sell them. We used the daffodils this past year as a fundraiser for the children's school. The way I see it, Daffodil Hill is just one big outdoor classroom. You know, this show is all about blurring the lines between inside and out. I look for every possible way to do it. Daffodils in the field, daffodils in the house. But you know, I think I pushed it about as far as I ever have. You see, the backdrop of Daffodil Hill recently made a great setting for hosting some younger students who were visiting to see the farm and meet musician and conservationist Chuck Leavell. Now, I think Chuck is just amazing. I have to say I was blown away not only by his passion for music, but his message for caring for the earth and what he shared with the children. You see, Chuck started the event by reading to the kids from his book, The Tree Farmer.
"Grandfather," says the boy, "I thought you lived on a farm. Well, you don't have very many chickens, and where are the cows and the pigs?" And the grandfather says slowly, "We grow trees." Wow, let's talk about all of these things that come from trees. You guys ever think about that so much? What are some of the other things that wood gives us that are made of wood? Yes, sir.
So there you have
Yes,
it.
sir.
A guy who's performed with the
Boxes.
likes of
That's
Eric
great.
Clapton and the
Yeah,
Rolling
that's right.
Stones, and
On
who's
the
been
end?
named Tree Farmer of the Year by the state of Georgia, reading to school children in the middle of Daffodil
Yes,
Hill.
insects live there, all kinds.
You know, Chuck, we've got some very old trees here on this place, 7 post oaks that I call the 7 Sisters.
Oh, that's neat.
And we had a dendrologist come up and assess their age and felt like they were between 300 and 350 years old.
Oh, isn't that marvelous? Well, you know, it's important for homeowners to understand what they have to begin with if they have some beautiful old trees like that. But let me ask you something like, what species of trees do you recommend for ornamental type trees to go around people's homes?
Well, I think you can never go wrong looking around and seeing what does well in your area.
Right.
Okay.
Indigenous.
Well, certainly
indigenous.
start with the natives.
Right.
You know, that's a great way to start. Some of my personal favorites include the maples. Hard to beat a good sugar maple, a red maple.
Beautiful color and all.
Oh my heavens, yeah, just spectacular. Oaks, scarlet oak is fabulous. Love that. If you come down in scale to ornamentals, certainly there are Japanese maples. The serviceberry, Amelanker, is a wonderful small tree to have.
Ginkgo trees are a lot of fun
Oh,
as well.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
Beautiful, extraordinary color again in the autumn.
Yeah,
Adds
yeah.
a lot to the surroundings.
Takes a little while to get them started, but once they're there, they are there. You know, I think that so often we don't realize what an asset these great trees are around your home. They cut down on energy costs.
Exactly.
They certainly add to the curb appeal
Yeah.
to your property.
Yeah.
You know, when we started here, I felt so fortunate when I had a certified arborist, Mark Chisholm, come on board and help me get my hands around the Seven Sisters. And I just was able to sleep better at night knowing that they had been really pruned and dealt with in a responsible way.
That's a wonderful point. I think it's important for homeowners to call on a qualified arborist if they have questions concerning the trees on their property, or if they have a tree that has a particular problem.
Well, you know, if you don't believe that the trees on your property are worth something, wait till you don't take care of it and it blows down on your house.
Well, that's right. I think preventative medicine is an important thing. You know, look up, look around your house, make sure you don't have any limbs that are just obviously on top of your house that need to be removed. And if they do need to be removed, the bottom line is if you're going to do it yourself, you better understand the safety issues. Better than that, get a qualified arborist to do the job.
That is sound advice.
There you go.
Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, you bet.
This is the part of the show I really enjoy because we get to take some photographs that you send to me. We play around with some design ideas. Today, we've got a beautiful new house in the Craftsman style from Becky in Oregon. Now just take a look. You can see it's new construction, and she says she's not that happy with the landscape she has. It was probably part of the builder's package. So now's a good time to maybe move some of those things around. I've got a few ideas for you, Becky. The first thing, of course, that jumps out at you here is that you've got all these utilities here that we'll definitely want to screen. I'm not sure exactly where your property line is from this photograph, but let's assume that it's somewhere in here. I think that to give this a very natural feel, which is something you indicated you wanted, we might start on this side up here with maybe some of those birch. You being in Oregon, you're going to be able to grow those beautiful white multi-trunk birch. There's an idea for that. And then under the birch, I would fill this all in with evergreens to try to hide these utilities as much as possible. All right, let me put away this. Let's get started with some ideas that will springboard off of what I just talked about. All right, let's go back and we're going to put in our birch here. Maybe it's 2 or 3 of them and they're on this hillside. And we're going to use some rhododendron back here in the back. I love leaving the big stones that you have in place. I would come down and probably add some laurels in front. Now I don't know, you need to check with code and make sure you can cover these things. And then likewise here I would use another evergreen. You might take one of these little spruce, or maybe just leave these and bump this one back. So keep that group of spruce here on the corner. And then for the front, I think what I would do is I'd like to balance this with a spring flowering tree. So all the way on the far right side over here, I might come in with a beautiful Yoshino cherry that would be planted over here. It would come into this space. And you probably need another evergreen right in here. So we could go back to a rhododendron. You want to repeat the same thing. So think about rhododendron here, rhododendron here. You're going to have the cherry over there. You can see how we're beginning to balance this. If you really wanted to make it charming in the cottage style, not sure which direction the front of the house faces, but what we could come in and do, and we could do a rose of some sort or some sort of vine across those really handsome timbers. Now, let's think just a moment about some of the perennials and annuals, which would really add a lot of punch to this. Currently, you have this little yellow daylily. Looks like a variety called Happy Returns. What I think would be better with the color palette you have here is maybe more of an apricot or salmon colored daylily. Just think about that. And rather than spot them around, you can see we've got them all over the place, I would group them together. So what I'm going to suggest here is obviously you're going to have to keep this gravel for your drainage, but you can conceal that quite readily by using some pennisetum or grasses along here. I would add purple coneflowers and then those big drifts of daylilies like I talked about maybe here across the front. Then you've got right at the edge an opportunity to grow any number of annuals. You could, in the spring and summer, you could have petunias cascading out here, maybe one called Bermuda beach that has sort of that salmon color to it would work, I think, beautifully with the brick color. You got a great looking place here, Becky. Good luck with it. While we're here in the design studio, I thought it would be fun to take a look at some container gardening combinations. I love container gardening. It's so easy and satisfying. It doesn't take a lot of time. Now what you see here are 3 containers over in my shade garden, which gets a lot of morning sun, so it's really partial shade. What I've done is a combination of foliage and bloom, which I love to do. And you can see that this is one container here, which is a large. This one is a medium, and this one is small, and they hang together quite nicely by stair-stepping them this way. Now let's talk just a moment about the plant selection, because that is so important to create a harmonious result. What I have here in the large one is a foliage plant called Zen Moment Coleus. You can see it here and here. Wonderful coleus, has a pale yellow center, and I use that as a color echo in this container over here with this calibrachoa, which is wonderful. And then I echo it over here with this sedge. This is one of the Japanese sedges. It's a grass-like plant. And then the color yellow is echoed in the throat of this little wishbone flower, or Terenia. I just love how dark blue it is. And then look at this light blue flower here. This is called Ageratum from the Artist series. In my garden, it can get really hot in the summer, and this one's actually been trialed in the Dallas Arboretum and has done very well, so you know it gets hot down there. So what I have here is a combination of blues and yellows. Your foliage plants, well, the coleus here, the sedge here, and then we fill in with these various shades of blue with the Terenia and the Ageratum. Now, you can see how this pink over here kind of gets in the way, so don't really pay any attention to that. What I love to do in my garden is create these little vistas, these little vignettes. And these blues work well with this blue-gray hosta back here, which would make a great background plant. And you can see just over here, just a touch of that blue-gray Pois Castle Artemisia. All of these colors harmonize beautifully together. Now, if you don't have a lot of space or don't have a lot of time, give container gardening a try. You can create an ensemble like this in just very little time. And all I did is I started with 3 of these beautiful glazed pots in sort of a neutral charcoal brown and added color. And there you have it.
I am a steward of this land and have worked hard with respect and love to care for the trees. This land has given us her gifts for generations. If we are reckless, we could destroy this forest as well as all the animals in it. We must remember to give of ourselves as the forest gives to us. Look, there's
now that's the way to close out a show with a rock and roll conservationist and a bunch of enthusiastic kids learning about growing trees and daffodils. I hope you had as much fun with this show as we did putting it all together. And I hope you have a great and happy spring. From the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith. More information about today's topic and other topics covered in this series can be found at plansmith.com.